Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something really interesting, the UK's Defence Intelligence, or DI. One of you actually asked us to look into this, so we've dug into the material to really understand how this organization works. It's pretty crucial for national security, so think of this as getting under the hood a bit.
Exactly. We're going to explore DI, and it's got a pretty unique spot in the UK intelligence world. You know, unlike MI5 or MI6 or GCHQ, which are sort of separate agencies,
Right.
DI is actually part of the Ministry of Defense, properly integrated. And it's staffed by both civilians and military personnel, funded from the defense budget. It's quite a mix.
Okay, so Defence Intelligence. Let's start there. What's the core of what they actually do? What are they analyzing?
Right, so their main job is what's called all-source intelligence analysis. And the key thing there is all-source. They're not just looking at one type of secret information. They're pulling together, everything they can get their hands on. Public information news reports, academic papers, you name it, and the secret stuff, the covert intelligence. Think of it like building a huge jigsaw puzzle. They need all the different kinds of pieces.
To get the full picture.
Exactly. And this analysis is, well, it's vital. It feeds directly into military operations that are happening right now. It helps with planning for, potential future situations, contingency planning. And it informs those really big long-term decisions about defense policy, what kit the military needs, that kind of thing.
So, if I'm understanding this right, MI6 might be, say, running agents overseas.
Yeah.
GCHQ is listening to signals.
Yep.
But DI is the bit that takes all that, adds maybe public info, and then tells the government what it means.
That's a great way to put it, yes. SI, so that's MI6, focuses on human intelligence. GCHQ does SIGINT, signals intelligence. They're collectors. DI takes the raw intelligence from them and from other sources too, plus all that open source data we mentioned. And their analysts work out what's actually going on. What are the threats? What are the opportunities? The real skill is synthesizing it all, making sense of these different, sometimes contradictory streams of information.
And this analysis doesn't just stay within the Ministry of Defense, does it?
Yeah.
I gather it goes wider.
Oh, absolutely. DI's assessments are critical input for the Joint Intelligence Committee, the JIC. That's the top body coordinating intelligence across the whole government. Their work also supports other government departments, and they share a lot with international partners like NATO and the EU. A really fundamental part of their job is providing timely strategic warnings. Flagging up significant political or military developments or even scientific breakthroughs that could affect UK interests down the line. The person leading this whole effort right now is Adrian Byrd. He took over from General James Hockenhall.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. The history. This organization didn't just appear out of nowhere, did it? Sounds like it's got deep roots.
You're absolutely right. It goes way back. The earliest precursor was formed in 1873, the intelligence branch of the War Office. That then became the Directorate of Military Intelligence in 1888.
Wow, 1800s.
Yeah. Think about the world then, the British Empire, lots of global rivalries heating up. There was a growing realization they needed a proper, dedicated structure for military intelligence.
And how did that evolve? Any key moments that pushed things forward?
Well, a big step was the Committee of Imperial Defense, set up in 1902. That really started to push for better coordination between the different services, Army, Navy, and eventually Air Force. Then World War I, obviously, hugely accelerated things. You saw all these specialized military intelligence sections pop up, the MI department.
Like MI5 and MI6 started then.
Well, their origins are around that time, but within the military intelligence sphere, you had things like MI1, which was like the secretariat handling the paperwork, and MI4, which was focused on aerial photography, incredibly important new tech back then. A lot of the functions from those early MI units eventually got folded into what became DI.
Okay, so the World Wars were massive catalysts. What happened after World War II? How did we get closer to the DI we know today?
Right. So after WWII in 1947, the War Office's mapping and geographical section was transformed into something called the Joint Intelligence Bureau, or GIB. This was a really important move towards integrating intelligence assessment. The head of the GIB even got a seat on the main Joint Intelligence Committee.
So becoming more central.
Definitely. And the GIB was quite structured. It had divisions looking at everything from military procurement and geography to specific things like enemy defenses, airfields, even oil supplies and telecoms, very detailed stuff. But the really pivotal moment was 1964.
What happened then?
That's when the modern Ministry of Defense was created, unifying the Admiralty, the War Office, and the Air Ministry. And as part of that massive reorganization, the separate intelligence arms of the Navy, Army, and Air Force were merged with the GIB to form the Defense Intelligence Staff, or DIS, as it was known then.
Ah, so that's a direct ancestor.
That's the direct lineage, yes. Initially, their big focus was inevitably the Cold War, but over the decades, the focus shifted, towards supporting operations overseas, tracking weapons of mass destruction, counterterrorism. The threats evolved, and DIS, later DI, evolved with them. That 1964 amalgamation was key, recognizing that modern threats needed a joined-up intelligence picture, not just separate service views.
Now, speaking of evolving threats and intelligence,
Mhm.
there's a period in DI's history that certainly generated a lot of headlines and scrutiny. I'm talking about the run-up to the 2003 Iraq invasion.
Yes. The role of DI's intelligence in putting together that public dossier in September 2002, that's a really critical and very controversial chapter. That dossier was meant to lay out the case based on intelligence for why Saddam Hussein's regime posed a threat that might require military action.
And I remember reading at the time there was unease, wasn't there?
Well,
Within DI itself.
There was. Specifically within what was then called the Defense Intelligence Analysis Secretariat, DIAS. Several very experienced weapons specialists there had serious doubts. They were concerned about how certain the dossier sounded about Iraq's WMD capabilities and how immediate the threat was presented. People like Dr. Brian Jones, who led the WMD analysis branch, actually put their concerns in writing. They felt the language was too strong, that it didn't reflect the uncertainties and the gaps in the actual intelligence picture.
And what happened with those concerns? Were they listened to before the dossier went public?
Well, the record shows they were overruled. The Chief of Defense Intelligence at the time, Air Marshal Sir Joe French, decided to go with a stronger wording. One claim that became particularly infamous was that Iraq could deploy chemical or biological weapons within 45 minutes of an order.
The 45-minute claim? Yeah, remember that.
Exactly. And Dr. David Kelly, a government weapons expert who spoke to journalists off the record about his doubts, reportedly described that specific claim as risible, basically absurd. Tragically, as you know, Dr. Kelly was later identified as the source, the pressure mounted, and he took his own life. That led directly to the Hutton inquiry.
And what did Hutton find regarding that specific piece of intelligence, the 45-minute claim?
The inquiry found it came from a single piece of intelligence described as compartmentalized. What that meant, essentially, was that the specific report behind the claim hadn't been shared widely, crucially not with the key WMD experts within DI itself.
So the people best placed to judge it didn't see it.
That seems to be the case. Dr. Jones later said he thought it was highly unlikely any real WMD expert would have found the claim credible if they'd actually seen the raw intelligence before it went in the dossier. And of course, the hard reality is that no WMD were ever used by Iraq during the invasion, and no significant stockpiles or active programs were found afterwards. This led to another review, the Butler Review, looking specifically at the intelligence failures. It's a stark lesson, really, about the dangers of intelligence becoming politicized and the absolute need for rigorous challenge and assessment within these organizations.
Okay, let's shift focus to the present day. How has DI adapted since then? We've seen huge global events like the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
What's DI's role look like there?
Well, that's been quite noticeable. Since the full-scale invasion began, DI has taken a much more public role in releasing intelligence assessments. They were putting out information about likely Russian troop movements even before the invasion started.
I remember seeing those maps.
Yes, exactly. And since then, they've provided pretty regular updates on the conflict, assessments of the battlefield situation, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, that kind of thing. Of course, Russia accuses them of spreading disinformation, but it's definitely a shift towards using intelligence more openly.
And behind the scenes, structurally, have there been big changes to how DI operates recently?
Yeah, there have been some significant reorganizations to try and improve capabilities. Back in 2012, something called the Joint Forces Intelligence Group, or JFI, was set up. JFI essentially took over from the previous intelligence collection group and sits under what's now Strategic Command.
And what does JFI actually do?
It's basically the operational engine for gathering a lot of DI's intelligence. It brings together several key units. You've got the National Center for Geospatial Intelligence, NCGI, at RAF Whiten. That's the descendant of the old JERIC, doing imagery analysis from satellites, aircraft, etc. There's the Defense Geographic Center, providing mapping and terrain analysis.
Crucial for military ops.
Absolutely. Then there's the Joint Services Signals Organization, JSSO. based at RAF Digby, but with a very important outpost in Cyprus, handling signals intelligence collection, and the Defense Human Unit, managing human intelligence sources. In 2013, JFI headquarters moved to RAF Whiten as well, bringing many of these collection and analysis functions physically closer together.
So quite a complex structure. Who's in charge of coordinating all this? What does the leadership look like now?
At the very top, you have the Chief of Defense Intelligence, the CDI. This is a very senior post. It can be held by either a three-star military officer that's like a lieutenant general, vice admiral, or air marshal, or an equivalent senior civil servant, which kind of reflects that blend of military and civilian expertise in DI. The CDI is basically the Ministry of Defense's overall boss for intelligence, responsible for the whole process across defense. Supporting the CDI, you have two key deputies. There's a civilian deputy chief of defense intelligence, the DCDI. They're responsible for the analysis and production side, the actual intelligence reports and assessments. And then there's a military director of cyber intelligence and information integration, DCI3, who looks after the collection capabilities and how they all fit together.
Okay. And what sort of things fall under those deputies? What are their teams focused on?
So the DCDI, the civilian deputy, oversees the directorates that do the deep thinking. You've got teams doing strategic assessments, looking at specific countries or regions or broader global issues, teams assessing the military capabilities of other countries, weapon systems. There's a directorate focused on counterproliferation, stopping the spread of dangerous weapons and technologies, and another on counterintelligence, protecting UK defense secrets. They're the ones turning all the raw data into finished intelligence for policymakers, using classified info and open sources.
And the military deputy, DCI-3.
DCI-3 is more focused on delivering the specialist intelligence inputs and capabilities, so managing things like the imagery intelligence from NCGI, the geographic support, and also overseeing all the intelligence and security training for the armed forces. That training is mainly centered at the Joint Intelligence Training Group, JITG, which is based at MOD Chicksands.
It sounds incredibly broad. If you had to boil it down, what are the absolute core functions DI delivers for the UK?
I'd say there are four really fundamental roles. First, direct support in military operations. DI's intelligence is woven into military planning and execution at every level. Think Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia. UN peacekeeping DI provides analysts, linguists, geospatial data right onto the front line sometimes.
Okay, that's one.
Second, support to contingency planning. DI provides the crucial intelligence assessments needed to prepare for future potential military commitments. What might happen? What would we need? What's the environment like?
Planning for the what-ifs.
Exactly. Third, providing early warning. This is absolutely vital. DI has to spot emerging crises or dangerous trends and alert ministers and military chiefs, giving them time to react or prepare.
Right.
And fourth, longer-term analysis of emerging threats. This is about looking over the horizon. What will the battlefield look like in 10, 20 years? What new technologies might potential adversaries develop? How do we develop countermeasures? It feeds directly into our own military development.
It's quite interesting to look back at the list of people who've held that top job, the CDI, over the years. We've got a list here. Does that tell us anything?
Yeah, looking at the list of Directors General Intelligence and then Chiefs of Defense Intelligence, you see it starting with someone like Major General Sir Kenneth Strong back in the mid-60s, and then evolving through various very senior figures, Air Chief Marshals, Vice Admirals, Lieutenant Generals, right up to Adrian Byrd today. It really highlights that it's always been a top-level joint service role, needing someone who understands the perspectives of the Navy, Army, and Air Force, plus the civilian intelligence side. It underscores that integrated nature we talked about.
And just to place DI in a global context, do our allies have similar organizations?
Oh, definitely. Most major countries have something equivalent. The U.S. has the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, which is probably the best-known counterpart, plus their National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA. Canada has CFI-NT-TACOM, Canadian Forces Intelligence Command. Australia has the Defense Intelligence Organization, DIO, and the Australian Geospatial Organization, AGO. New Zealand has DDI's Directorate of Defense Intelligence and Security.
So it's a fairly standard model internationally.
It seems to be, yes. It reflects that fundamental need for militaries and governments to have dedicated, all-source intelligence analysis focused specifically on defense and security issues.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together then. This deep dive has really shown, I think, just how central defense intelligence is to the UK's whole security setup. It's got this long, evolving history, a really complex structure today. But its core mission seems clear. provide that comprehensive intelligence picture to support defense and keep the country safe.
And I think it's worth stressing again that its position inside the Ministry of Defense really does make it different from MI5, MI6, or GCHQ. That integration shapes everything: its focus, how it's overseen, its relationship with the military and policymakers. It's a unique beast.
So, as you've been listening to all this, thinking about the sheer amount of sensitive information DI handles, its history, its influence on huge national decisions, really makes you think, doesn't it, about the challenges and, frankly, the ethical tightropes involved in running an organization like this in today's incredibly complex and fast-changing world. What does effective, responsible intelligence look like in the 21st century? Something to ponder.